Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Change Itself. We're back here with another episode with Eric Demers and a special guest, Dr. Moody. So we're looking forward for another great conversation. If it's the first time that you're tuning in, thank you for checking us out. And if you're coming back as a repeat guest, we really appreciate your support. And for everyone to stay on top of what we're doing, you can always check us out on changeitself.com or follow through with LinkedIn and follow our page with Change Itself, the same name. And yeah, we encourage you to give us as much comment and feedback as you can. Share the content, like our page, like our YouTube channel. And we promise to continue to deliver great content to you on a monthly basis. Welcome back, Eric, from your holidays last time.
No, thanks, Gus. It's excited to be back, and I missed it. It's too bad I missed that conversation. We tried to do it on a previous occasion and had some technical difficulties, so had to reshoot. And it's too bad I missed it. But here we are. We're back. Excited to be back.
Right on. Yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, like I said, we're here. We're joined with a very special guest this month, Dr. Moody, the Chief Prevention Officer and the Assistant Minister Deputy of the Prevention Division for the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. Did I get that right?
Almost, Gus. But, almost. The Assistant Deputy Minister. So
Assistant Deputy Minister.
Definitely appreciate the promotion. So thank you.
Right on. No, thank you for joining. I know you've got a very busy schedule. And it's a very honorable schedule as well as far as taking care of the prevention matters and the health and safety matters for the province and everybody involved with labor. So thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Gus, and Eric. Thank you so much for having me. Once again, for the audience and your listeners, so happy to be here to kind of spread the good word that we're talking about right now. So thanks.
Right on. So Dr. Moody, I mean, we did have a few occasions where we were able to connect under a couple of different formats, and something that's recurring, right, is everybody is really working hard on setting really good expectations and goals with their health and safety programs, and we're seeing a lot more involvement with the as it relates to the workplace safety culture. Would you have more to add around that topic and to share with us what you've seen playing out throughout our community?
Yeah, no, happy, Gus, because when we talk about safety culture, something that's very near and dear to my heart, because when we talk about all of the great work that is happening in Ontario, we're one of the safest provinces in Canada, actually one of the safest locations throughout the world. But at the heart and at the foundation is what we refer to as a robust health and safety culture. And there's always room for improvement. And so, happy to chat with you a little bit about it, because when we talk about building kind of a health and safety culture, we know that at that foundation, the joint works between both employer and employee. So important, because if you don't have that buy-in, you can have all the great policies, or you can have all the great, men and women that are in the workplace. But if you don't have that synergy of working together, you're not going to advance and improve safety. And that is how we want to set it to be very strong. So it's about shared values, shared beliefs, because we know top to bottom, it has to be in existence.
No, thanks for sharing that, Dr. Moody. I would echo that sentiment that the employer working with employees is absolutely imperative to a good culture. And I mean, you touched on it, being a safe province, and I think we're up to is helping everybody, both here in Ontario and anywhere else that people may be listening from. Some of the things you touched on there were really pieces that we've explored maybe in the past around change management and, getting buy-in from different work groups and stakeholders. And I think we get to work at it and live in that kind of realm, but at a micro level, when I really start to take a step back and, look at what your role would require, what level of changes? Is it the same processes, or can you share about the processes that go into where do you pick a topic, and how does that build out, and how do you cascade and engage different parties in achieving your outcomes and your goals?
I appreciate the question, Eric. And the very first answers that I can say is that it takes all of us in order to move in a positive direction. I've been fortunate enough to be sitting in the chair as the Chief Prevention Officer, where kind of my goal is to help develop a strategy that creates good outcomes. And the outcomes that we're really focusing on as a system is we want a reduction in injury, fatality, and occupational disease. If I can be very clear, because our goal is zero, and we're not going to stop until we get to zero, but we have some work to do. So how do we do it? Well, it's part of strategy. And at the ministry, we've released what's referred to as Prevention Works. And that's really the overarching 5-year strategy that talks about how are we going to get from our current state to the state that we want to get to through change management. So using data, using evidence to really drive home and measure what is it exactly that we're trying to accomplish. And if we're able to now be very clear with what that objective is, it helps all of our stakeholders be very clear at what the common goal is. So we can articulate it, we can see it, we can measure it, we can feel it. All of those things that are so important, because when we were speaking about safety culture, having the buy-in from all levels, top to bottom, it's the same with our strategy. So data, so important to set very clear outcomes that we're working toward. But then kind of the second part, how do our stakeholders, how do our partners see themselves as part of the solution? You may have heard me say it in some other things that I talk about. No one entity, no one body, no one person knows it all. We all have a shared responsibility in the system. And that is part of what I've been working on with my staff, with all of our stakeholders, helping identify so that the employers see themselves, the labor unions see themselves, the non-rep workers see themselves as part of the solution in order to go to that positive state that we're aiming. So those are kind of the beginning parts of that change management.
Because a big part of change management is there's a lot of communication. And how do those messages get crafted, tracked? Is there monitoring going on to understand, and metrics, maybe KPIs? You talked about data on, is my message, being received? Are people participating? I know we have been through our involvement in Health Safety Excellence Program, which is part of the Prevention Works model. So clearly it landed with us, and we're taking that on. But how do we know, small businesses, other people like that? And I mean, I would echo that for myself, and I'm looking maybe to learn and take something away. Is like, I have multiple stakeholders. We have employees, supervisors, clients, outside community members, and we have to communicate and want a unified message, and we really want to drive change. But how do I go about, what kind of metrics should I maybe be looking for that I could relate back to see if my message was understood and understood clearly?
Yeah, great. Once again, the question is always, how can you evaluate effectiveness? That's kind of that question that we talk about. Well, I think it goes back to what you said, Eric, is having a very clear message at the beginning. I try to be very clear with what is the message that we're trying to send? What are the key kind of components? 1, 2, 3. No more than that, because I can't handle personally more than 3 things at a time, and maybe I don't even do those 3 well most of the time. So maybe 1 or 2, but having very clear, because one of the goals is about raising awareness. So that very first question is, how can you raise awareness? Because once you raise awareness, then you can start to work around education. Because if you're not even aware of what your roles and responsibilities are, what you are accountable for or not accountable for, how can you then understand what you need to do? So to your point, one of the things that we try to do very often is to send out surveys, something very quick, 1 to 3 questions that we can measure. To your point, are people aware of the issue that we're raising? So we track over time. We track with different sectors, be it construction, be it industrial, commercial, whatever it may be, hospitals. So we use that to help us understand. But then that next step, and I think this is where you were helping us get to, is that effectiveness. So you're sending out messages, but are people understanding, and are you raising awareness to help improve education? So sending out the measures, looking at them, and then asking yourselves, are we actually tracking in the positive direction or the direction that we want to get to? So always doing self-reflection and evaluate what you're doing.
Every worker deserves to go home safely at the end of the day. Book a demo with Sofvie to discover how their groundbreaking EHS Management Software empowers workers to proactively avoid hazards and how organizations like yours can cultivate a stronger work culture. Visit them at sofvie.com to learn more. Technica Mining is a premier underground mining and construction contractor. They stand for delivering quality project work on time and on budget through innovative thinking. Their excellent safety record, experienced workforce, and large equipment fleet will guarantee the timely completion of all your project needs. Trusted by the world's leading mining companies, Technica Mining has over 20 years of experience in mine construction, development, and production. Contact Technica Mining to take your next mining project to the next level. Visit them at technicamining.com. Change Itself is produced by Crownsmen, the voice of industry. Check out more, including the Crownsmen Show, Mining Now, the Building Energy Show, and Agriculture Now at crownsmen.com.
It's a very good point you bring there, because like I've seen it happen before, right? You have you can create a very good message on where you want to go. And then there's, a little bit of a fog because, people don't understand necessarily how they're going to get there. But then there's other objectives that get put into place, not because it's a different path or a different objective or different goal, is that we're trying to implement certain things to drive us towards the common goal. But it doesn't seem clear that what we're doing today is actually getting us to that goal. So have you seen that happen before, Dr. Moody, where the boots on the ground kind of activities doesn't seem to correlate with the common goal, and then you kind of get a little bit of a foggy area there?
Gus, I think you've experienced what I experienced, both current job as well as past jobs. Eric, the same. It has to do with communication, my point, because there's no thing or there's no way that you can over communicate. And sometimes people, for many different reasons, you're having multiple, to your point, Gus, multiple things that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. But how do you keep and help people reminding them that at the end of the day, all of these activities are connected together? All of the activities that we're working together as a whole are making benefits. So, every 3 months, every 2 months, touch base with people, talk with them, not to tell them what to do, but ask questions. What are you seeing? How is this helping you do your job better? And are you seeing improvements? Because all of that is about measurement, evaluation. Because if the message is not clear, we can find ways to recalibrate. If the message is not clear, we can maybe find ways to restate it. Because, at the end, I'm always cognizant or aware of, in our case, our inspectors, our other frontline staff, our ergonomists, those great individuals who are having direct interaction with business. And so how are we also helping them do their jobs better, which we want to translate to better working with our stakeholders through education, awareness, and knowledge. So all of those things have to come together. So listen and ask questions every day.
How would you, and something you said there had me thinking about some legislative changes that have come about, or different court rulings, and that would obviously impact maybe policy or direction or course of action on such a big program, like a 5-year type of program. How would that impact, and then what kind of how would you handle the change from that? Because I'm sure it happens. I mean, it happens to us all the time. We might have an incident, and all of a sudden we go back and we revisit the systems that are in place and how they're working or meant to be working, and we make adjustments, and then we've got to roll it out, communicate. I wonder how that happens on a bigger scale.
Yeah, no, and I think this is an opportunity to maybe demystify that process, because many times, not being within government, the process may seem just not clear. So the opportunities that we have, and thanks once again for allowing me to come and speak to yourselves and speak with your listeners. At the end of the day, the purpose of legislation and regulation is, at least from the MLITSD standpoint, is about improving the opportunities to have a safe environment. So we really want to have rules, because that's kind of what these legislations and regulations are, rules that are there to support good practice. So, for example, some of the regulations or legislations that we have been able to put in place have unfortunately come from situations where there was a fatality. And so there was a failure in the system somewhere. And so through the work with our stakeholders, through the work with technical committees, those that really understand the intricacies of how something works, they bring it to the attention of government. And then the next phase is government takes those initiatives and looks at other factors as well that may not necessarily have been as easy for the technical groups to think about. Because, for example, would the technical group know about, is this a duplicative rule that exists maybe somewhere else? Or would this particular type of rule that we would want to maybe introduce counteract something somewhere else? So that's another layer that happens. And so you want to ensure that whatever you're proposing doesn't have unintended consequences as much as possible. So that analysis takes place and happens. Then, of course, ultimately, it goes to the elected officials. And through that process, it's debated, it's relied upon. But at the end of the day, the feedback that is coming from the field, the feedback that is coming from science with the research, the feedback that's coming about, well, it's maybe not necessarily what has happened in the past, but we know that there are new ways of doing work. Do the legislation and regulation keep pace with the new technology? Is it keeping pace with the new way of doing work? So that at the end of the day, we can be preventive in order to not have those adverse outcomes from happening. So highly needed input, and that's kind of the next steps.
No, thanks for that insight. And you touched on technology, which kind of brings in an interesting topic. And it's around the introduction of new technologies, and technology is moving at such a rapid pace that it often maybe outpaces the speed of legislation, because you just can't keep up with it. And it's like new things happen that people would never have thought were there or possible. And so that's something we face at times, is we have technology, we want to apply it, and then we're taking a step back and trying to figure out, like, the legislation in some places is still written very much like hard paper. And so how does that look from the perspective of the government does not move quickly. It's a big entity. And so, and I say that relative to a small, nimble, small business or organization where it's fewer people, so less people involved in making decisions. And so how can government work, or how does it work to enable technology or to recognize that change in introduction and speed?
Yeah, and I think that's the balance that we are always trying to reach is to your point, entrepreneurship, innovation, technology businesses, those are the things that keep Ontario strong. And so, definitely, through all of the work, we want to encourage businesses to be innovative. We want to find ways to do things that once again help produce efficiencies within their work and better productivity. Where we find it is we want to ensure that it's done safely. And so, how do we find the balance? And once again, it goes back to that internal responsibility system, employer, employee working together to help raise the issues. Because once again, in new industries that are coming up, to your point, Eric, legislation may never have contemplated that particular industry, but somewhere someone has.
Yeah.
And so now, okay, we do have, once again, legislation that does cover, the general aspects, but sometimes we need a little more specificity or something a little more specific. But that's where the opportunity comes in to help government raise the point to government, help us understand the pros and cons, and that's where it is a joint kind of operation. My words, that we work together with the public, with the people in the province who are wanting to do the best things.
Oh, that's fantastic. What would be the best course of action or best place to start to raise that awareness or that topic with government? How would someone go about that?
Yeah, well, no, there are many places for input into government. Within the occupational health and safety system, which is what we work through.
Yep.
We have Section 21 committees that are joint employer-employee driven. We have the Prevention Council, that is also another great group that's there to look to identify what are some options that they could then recommend. But directly with your MPP, that's another mechanism to raise, and through your labor organizations, your non-representative groups as well. Everyone has a voice, and I want to ensure and remind people your voice is strong. So raise it, let us become aware, even going back to some of the old analog technology of pen and paper and posting a letter. Those things are equally as valued in order to raise awareness for us if there's an issue.
Very good, because that could be, to Eric's point, that's something. So some of the mystification is that I don't know how to express my voice, so I'm just not going to say anything because I don't know where to go. So thanks for clearing that out, and I'm sure it's going to serve well with a lot of our viewers and how they can make a difference. And something that we touched on that was very interesting to me, as far as looking back and kind of seeing where else certain things have applied, so we can kind of learn from precedents. We experience it all the time, Eric and I in particular, where we touch many different sectors to be able to accomplish the goals that we have on a daily basis. And it's how do we get that communication to go from sector to sector? How do we learn from mining to construction to civil works to and then because everybody's going to be diving into very specific use cases on how they want to be preventative, and it might differ from sector to sector. Like maybe something that they want to prevent in civil works doesn't reach the radar in mining, but then there's other things in mining that doesn't reach the radar in civil works. But we can learn from all those initiatives and all those different ways of being. How are you guys approaching that at your level, as far as making sure that we can learn cross-divisionally, I guess we can call it?
Yeah, no, because that is a very, very important observation that we have to continue to do a better job on. So, when we talk about sectors, we have traditionally talked about them separately. But to your point, what may happen in a heavy civil environment or heavy civil project could equally be as important with other sectors. And so, when we talk about working at heights as a prime example, we have a working at heights standard, universal. Doesn't matter if you are doing construction or if you're doing some window washing, right? You apply those principles equally. And that came from having people, to your point, work together on tables. And that's part of what my job is as a CPO, is to create the neutral table that we have all interested parties come together and discuss. Because that is really, at the end of the day, communication and sharing your experience and sharing your knowledge. Because there may be some things that certain sectors have never contemplated, but a sector may have. Share with your colleagues, share that knowledge. Because that, once again, when we talk about the robustness of a safety culture, sharing knowledge, talking about the issues together, things work much better when we share.
I'm happy that you use the example of working at heights, because I'll share a little something that happened to me on the weekend. So, I mean, coming from the mining sector, I mean, we do have a lot of training and a lot of use of, working at heights, policies, procedures, and PPE and things like that. And it becomes kind of like ingrained in us and what we're doing, because we're constantly exposed, right? So I went with my wife, we went ziplining on the weekend. And then here I are, and I felt familiar, right? And the processes and procedures that were being applied, I mean, the equipment varied slightly, but the double hook and the safety lanyards and the tag lines and the distances away from the deck, where you can actually, everything was very familiar, right? And I was like, wow, it's exactly applicable the same way as I'm having a zip lining, fun activity, as it is to when I'm working in a very industrial workplace or in a mining sector, like I said, working around an open hole. And that was really cool to see. It was really, really cool to see, because it was the same language, same kind of materials, same kind of environment, same safeguards, right? To make sure we don't fall off the platforms and things like that. So that was really cool. So I'm really happy you shared that experience, because it kind of just immediately had a light bulb there where I said, that's where we kind of see that cross connection really come into play.
Exactly, Gus. And I think, that is another part of the conversation, is there are more similarities than differences, if we think about it. When we talk about a person going into work, they're going into work to, support family, they're going into work to make something better, do something. So, intrinsically, work, we all do it for fairly similar mechanisms. And we also want to do it safely. So, there are many more similarities than differences when we talk about the landscape. So how do we continue to have those discussions? And so I'll actually steal your example, Gus, to say, even in zip lining, working at heights works.
No, it's true. And Gus touched, we will often look and see different industries, and in those different industries, the one thing that's in common is we're all people. It's all humans, right? And so we all affected by the same type of conditions. And so it is nice to see that it's being talked about and shared across multiple industries, sectors, employers, employees, everybody at the table. We're all human. We're all people. We're all in it for the same reasons. So it's quite interesting. And kind of on that topic, the one piece that was kind of interesting for me and going through the Prevention Works framework was this concept around risk management. And that's something we apply at work all the time. And so how does risk management work at, it's a big, robust piece for us at the organizational level. How does that work at a provincial level? That's a pretty massive undertaking. Like, how do you identify all those major unwanted events and those specific hazards, and where do you prioritize? How do you prioritize which ones to tackle?
Prioritizing risk is a very important, activity that we have to do constantly. And we talk about data, and so my background as a clinician, as an epidemiologist, are very rooted in what do the data tell us. And so, for example, to your point, Gus, when we talk about risk assessment, what are the major hazards that are causing injury, death, or disease? we want to be able to target those because, once again, we all have limited resources. So how do we get the biggest bang for our buck? All right, how do we get the most? For example, if we know that 70% of all the fatalities are happening in three things, well, let's target those three things because that is going to affect 70%. Now, once again, we don't have resources to try to do everything, and we will cover it, but where do you start? And so I think that's a very important question that we're always trying to understand is where do you start? And for me, it's biggest bang for the buck, because once you have those under control, now instead of representing those three representing 70, well, you've now shrunken that to maybe 40%. So those other resources can now be utilized differently to kind of attack those others that are still prevalent. So the other piece is using a wide range of activities. So legislation is just one. So our enforcement activities, that's another. But what can also businesses do that are not part of a regulatory response? For example, how are businesses working with their employers to maybe do a tailboard talk before they actually start the work? Once again, an opportunity that the businesses can feed into that process as well in order to help improve safety. So targeting the biggest issues, and like I say, how do we untie that knot? Untying the knot in order to move things forward.
And that's probably the piece, Dr. Moody, that we probably see the most hardships when it comes to communication, right? Because you got some people that 100% of the world is affected by maybe 0.5% of what's seeing at the macro level, right? So then the conversation comes up, well, how come my stuff's not important? It's affecting 100% of my world. I mean, you must get a lot of those conversations, right? That come up, right?
We do, and by all means, every issue is an important issue. The question is, how do we now prioritize and deal with them?
Right.
Because there may be something that is very small, but it has an impact that's so large that it does take precedent for other reasons. Or to your point, it's something that's so large, it may have impact on every sector. And so we, once again, always is about the balance. And, doesn't mean that it's not important. It means that we have to find ways to do so in mechanisms that are going to have impact, because we also don't want people to waste time, waste effort, because how do we harness all those powers together to make those positive changes?
No, that's excellent. So I mean, I guess we'll take this opportunity as well. I mean, there's been so many learnings through this episode. I just want to keep going for hours on end, because I mean, there's so much that we can do. There's so much availability and then to your point, resources, time management, finance management, like all that stuff comes into play as far as like how we unravel that knot. I really like that analogy. So as far as a closing piece, I guess if you had something to kind of wrap this all together, and it's probably where we started as far as the communication piece. I mean, what do we want to leave our audience with as a closing statement for what we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, definitely. I would, kind of sum it into a couple of things is, when we talk about safety culture, ensuring that safety culture is all throughout a company, top to bottom, starting with upper management, middle management, workers and staff, doesn't matter, but you've got to have that culture in place. For what reasons? Well, it's there in order to support good practice, better practice, and to help companies do well. I've always said this as well. A healthy workforce is a productive and profitable workforce. So you can't separate the two. You have economic arguments about health and safety. You have health and safety arguments. They're not. You can't separate those two. They are together. So how do we work together? Communicate, talk often, talk frequently, and ensure that you are having those conversations with all parts of the organization. Your frontline staff will tell you what the issues are. And how do we as government make it easier for businesses as well? How do we help businesses, understand what requirements are, make it easier for business to be compliant with those requirements? And how do we minimize a lot of the red tape that exists? Decreasing burden. So all of those things are so important. And that is what we're focusing on with our next 5-year strategy: small business, striving for excellence, and using data to measure our progress.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Moody, for joining us today. It was a fantastic episode. I'm sure our audience is going to get a lot. Eric, thanks again for joining in.
No, thank you.
That was lots of fun with these episodes.
No, thanks a lot, Dr. Moody. Definitely a few takeaways there for me for sure. Appreciate it.
Gus, Eric, thank you so much for having me. And once again, to your listeners, hopefully you can come back again sometime and continue this great discussion, because safety never stops.
Safety never stops. It's really hard to produce when you're at home sick or injured, right? Or worse. Thanks again. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. I hope this episode served well for you. And once again, go ahead, comment as you please. We're looking forward to your feedback. Share with your colleagues, your friends, your community, and keep reaching out for new content. Changeitself.com or Change Itself on LinkedIn. And we're looking forward to producing more content and to get more of your feedback. Till next time.